Sireli hayranagitsner. Before we begin, we cannot ignore what is unfolding today. The United States and Israel have launched major military strikes on Iran. Our hearts are with the Armenian community in Iran, and our eyes are on Baku and Ankara because we know what opportunity looks like to them. History has shown us that every regional crisis is an opening that Azerbaijan and Turkey have been willing to exploit against Artsakh, against Armenia, and against our communities wherever we are. We are here today because the Armenian people are watching. Our demands for a real US-Armenia partnership and a real deterrent against Azerbaijani aggression have never been more urgent. Now let's honor why we are gathered. Thank you for standing here today. 38 years ago, in Sumgait, Armenians were hunted in the streets. They were beaten, tortured, murdered. 38 years later, we are still naming it for what it is. An Azeri state-orchestrated pogrom fueled by anti-Armenian hatred. The echoes of this genocide are continuing to unfold today. Sumgait was not an isolated incident. Neither was Baku, neither was Kirovabad, neither was Maragha. And what happened in Artsakh, in Nakhichevan, Western Armenia, are not separate from this ideology. The pattern of erasure is clear. We are here because remembrance is not optional. It is our responsibility. We refuse denial. We refuse distortion. We refuse silence. Because history has shown us one thing. If we, as Armenians, do not defend our homeland, no one else will. And as long as we are here, as long as our Armenian youth rise and speak, our nation will not be silenced. We will continue to speak truth loudly and without apology. Truth about Baku's illegal imprisonment and torture of Artsakh leaders and other Armenian hostages and demand their immediate release. Truth about the genocide that forced 150,000 Artsakh Armenians from the homes of millennia and demand their collective, safe, dignified return. Truth about ongoing cultural erasure of Armenian Christian and cultural heritage in Artsakh and demand their preservation. Truth about Azerbaijan's ongoing occupation of sovereign Armenian land and demand their immediate withdrawal. Truth so that justice will prevail. For it is only through justice that we will secure the lasting peace that our nation deserves. I would like to invite the treasurer of the Washington, D.C. Ani chapter, Angerui Arpa Shahnazarian, to give her remarks.
When Joseph Stalin had arbitrarily placed the Armenian land, known to us as Artsakh, under Azerbaijani control, citizens of Artsakh began to peacefully protest. They protested for their dignity, for their land, and for their lives, but the call for dignity was answered with decimation. Following these protests was a 3-day rampage against Christian Armenians living in Sumgait. This rampage included, but is not limited to, reports of Armenians being skinned and burned alive, raped, disemboweled, and mutilated. Those are just a few of the horrific acts that were done to Armenians by angry mobs, while Azeri authorities had the ability to stop these mobs, watched from a distance for 3 days. The horrific acts in Sumgait were just the start of anti-Armenian violence in the area. Civilians in Kirovabad and Baku were later tortured, hunted down, and threatened with genocide, something that we have been subjected to for generations. Now I ask, why aren't we angrier? This wasn't a distant part of our history. This was just 38 years ago. This atrocity happened during your lifetime, during my parents' lifetimes. This was a tragedy that has been pushed away while the victims of these pogroms and their families are silenced and ignored. We often focus on the trivial parts of our lives as Armenians living comfortably in our nice neighborhoods, surrounded by people who might not look twice at you. We then ignore the gritty and horrifying parts of the lives of those who came before us. The constant threat of erasure of an entire group of people should make us terrified that the events that happened in Sumgait, Kirovabad, and Baku could happen again, but this time it could happen to you. It could happen to us. And today we are watching the same patterns of the pogroms 38 years ago continue in Artsakh. Hostages remain in captivity, families remain separated, and over 100,000 Armenians have been forcibly displaced from their indigenous lands and ancestral homes. The children who left behind their toys, grandparents who left behind the graves of those they've loved before, and churches that are now under construction as they're being turned into mosques are not just statistics. It's a reality that we as Armenians must face head on. If we do not demand justice for the crimes of ripping Artsakhis from their homes, then we can never earn justice for the crimes committed in 1988 in Sumgait, Kirovabad, and Baku. If we do not demand justice for the children of Artsakh who will never see their fathers again, then places like Syunik in sovereign Armenia will be in just as much of a risk of attack and colonization that our ancestors have faced for millennia. What happened in Sumgait in 1988 and later in Kirovabad and Baku were not spontaneous outbursts of anger. They were organized eruptions of hatred fueled by propaganda and permitted by silence. When a state allows mobs to roam freely while neighbors are marked and hunted, when law enforcement turn away instead of stepping in, it's not chaos, it's complicity. And that complicity leaves scars that generations must carry, that we must carry. We cannot allow ourselves to become apathetic to that reality. Apathy is dangerous. Apathy tells us that these stories are from the past, that they belong in textbooks or in whispered family memories. But the survivors are still among us. Their trauma still courses through their veins. The displacement, the loss of homes, the broken communities are not abstract concepts. They are lived experiences that shaped who we are as people. Anger, when rooted in truth, is not something to be ashamed or embarrassed of. It is a recognition that injustice occurred. It is a refusal to accept historical revisionism. But anger alone is not enough. It must be transformed into remembrance, into education, and into advocacy. We must speak about these pogroms openly and unapologetically in order to demand acknowledgement and accountability. We must show up in front of the Azeri embassy every year in February, not to change their minds, because we know that their minds will always be filled with hatred towards our people, but to demand that the world listens to our grievances and that the survivors of anti-Armenian violence that still occurs today, to know that we will never give up on fighting for their reparations, even if it feels like an uphill battle. Because when atrocities are minimized or denied, they are given room to happen again. And we've seen it with our own eyes in Artsakh, what historical revisionism does to a group of people. History has shown us that indifference is a powerful ally to violence. If we remain silent, if we allow comfort to replace conscience, then we fail those who were murdered, those who were displaced, and those who still carry the wounds to these days. So let us get angry about Sumgait. Let us get angry about Kirovabad, and let us get angry about Baku, as they were not distant tragedies, but warnings. Let us honor the victims not only with our grief and our rage, but with our voices. Let us be louder than denial, stronger than silence, and united in the simple demand that our history be recognized and protected so that justice will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngerui Arpa. louder, stronger, united. These are the hallmarks of an Armenian youth committed to not only remembering these atrocities, but taking bold action here in Washington, D.C., in communities across the diaspora, and in our homeland to ensure justice is done. Next, I would like to introduce AYF DC ANI member Önger Alek Tekeyan to give his remarks.
Just 38 years ago, mass violence erupted in Sumgait. 20,000 Armenians were torn from their homes, and some 200 tragically lost their lives. In a horrifying fit of hysteria, Azerbaijani mobs broke into homes, dragged people onto the streets, and brutally beat and disfigured victims in a targeted campaign of ethnic cleansing. Why was it that Azerbaijan and the Soviet Union maintained a calculated silence while the blood was still fresh? Even when they finally spoke, systematic atrocities were reduced to the work of mere quote-unquote hooligans, criminally understating this massacre. Now, Azerbaijan blames Armenians for their own slaughter, in a trend of victim blaming that unfortunately continues to today. This perversion of reality is not just offensive, it is very dangerous. Aliyev and his government assert a discredited lie that Armenian nationalists incited violence among themselves to hurt the reputation of Azerbaijan. But the photos are irrefutable. Images of charred apartments and mutilated bodies do not lie. When truth is replaced with propaganda, injustice is repeated. This blatant fabrication of reality and heavily documented events echoes the genocidal rhetoric that the Turks used to justify their atrocities a century ago. How many times must the truth be buried before the world chooses to see it? And how many Armenians must suffer before denial is recognized as a continuation of the very crime itself? History has shown us a clear pattern: violence followed by denial, and suffering followed by silence. Every time the world ignores the truth, the door is left wide open for Azerbaijan or anyone else to commit the next atrocity. The response is never accountability, and America especially continues to appease a regime built on the foundations of authoritarian greed and state-sponsored cultural erasure. We are gathered here today to not forget these victims of inhumanity and to reinforce our stance that we will not tolerate the falsification of history. The moment we do, we dishonor the souls of those we lost in Sumgait, in Artsakh, and throughout our ancestral homeland. Memory is not an act of revenge. It is an act of justice. Silence compounds injustice. We see this far too often. We saw it when Azerbaijan denied the existence of prisoners of war, and we saw it when the world turned a blind eye to the use of white phosphorus on our soldiers and on our land. But let it be known that our presence here serves as our refusal to forget. For the martyrs of Sumgait, of Baku, of Kirovabad, of Maragha, and Artsakh, and the future of a free, independent, and united Armenia, we will remain vocal, we will remain vigilant, and we will hold the perpetrators of these atrocities accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Önger Alek. You are hearing the theme in the remarks today: a commitment to remain vocal, to remain vigilant, and a call to hold the Azerbaijani government, perpetrators of these massacres and the Artsakh genocide, accountable. Now I would like to call up Îngerui Areni Hamparyan, member of the AYF DC ANI chapter, to deliver remarks in Armenian.
Այսօր հավաքված ենք վերագենթանացնելու հայու ոգին, հիշելու մեր նահատակները եւ վառ բահելու հեղափոխության գայձը։ Սումգայթի չարթը քիդակցափար դեղի ունեցավ։ Այո, ազերին ադելության մեջ կդարեց։ Այո, ազերին մեր քրիստոնյա ըլլալու պատճառով գադարեց։ Այո, ազերին փնաչունչումի միտքով գադարեց, եւ այո, մեզի փորձեցին չարթել, որովհետև հայուն ոգին չգրցան մարել։ 1988-ին Արցախյան շարժումը գայձեմը գրագի ցևափոխվեցավ։ Հայերը դարիներով ապրելով առանց սեփական երկիր, առանց ունենալով արև, որ գփայլի հայկական հողի վրա, գանքնած էր մեր վայրակ թշնամիներուն թեմ, չհարցնելով, այլ բարդատրելով, որ Արցախը մեր հայրենիքի մեկ թրախտային անկյունը գբացկանի իր ժողովուրդին, գբացկանի այն հայերուն, որ դեսած են իր անկումը և նորոքումը, որ սիրած են հողը, որ սերունդ թե սերունդ բախպանած է թե սուրով, թե քրիչով, թե կյանքով։ Սումգայթը սկիզբն էր Արցախյան ազատագրումին, հիշեցում էր հայ ասկին, որ թուրքը և իր եղբայրը միայն գխոսին զենքի լեզուն, որ թուրքը և իր եղբայրը չեն տեսներ հայը իբր թրացի, բայց թշնամի, որ թուրքը և իր եղբայրը արժանի չէ թարնալ հայուն թաշնագիցը։ Մենք կհիշենք մեր պատմությունը, որովհետև թասեր են աբակային համար։ 1988-ի չարթը աղդոդ և բաղ արունով գադարած աններելի սխալը, թող միշտ հասլա մեր հայ ասկին, մինչ մենք կսքանք մեր նահատակներուն կյանքերը, մինչ մենք կհիշենք անմեղ հայ հոգիները, որ կողծվեցան այն աշխարհեն, ազերի ցերքեն, բադիվ փերենք Բաքվի գործված հայերուն, խոստանալով, միշտ վեր բահել արդարությունը, միշտ վեր բահել հայրենիքի հարադևությունը։ Այս բայկարը, այս սրբազան գրիվը, քեզի գբատկանի իմ հայ եղբայրներ և քույրեր, ինչպես հայու ցերքով ծնավ անկախության շարժում, ինչպես հայու ցերքով կյանքի բերվեցավ Արցախյան ազատություն, նույնը գրնա գտնվել հայու ցերքով։ Թող մեր շուրջը արձականքե գհիշենք և մեր կործը ծոլարգե վրեժ։ Վրեժին վերջնական ճամփան անգոդրուն հայրենիք է։ Թող մենք բոլորս հոն հանդիպենք ընկերներ։ Այս է մեր բայկարը և այս պիտի ըլլա մեր հաղթանակը։ Շնորհակալություն։
Thank you, Ngerui Arani. Yes, the destiny of the Armenian nation is in our hands. Mer tserkerum mech. And as Ngerui Arani so beautifully stated, it is with our hands that we will ensure the unbreakable Angodorun homeland that unites us. Next, I would like to invite ANCA's Government Affairs Director, Teresa Yerimian, to deliver her remarks.
Today, we gather in remembrance and to recommit. We remember the community in Sumgait, persecuted for being Armenian in February 1988, when Armenians were hunted in their homes while authorities looked away. We remember Kirovabad, where Armenians were driven out by violence and terror. We remember Baku in January 1990, a community that helped build that very city, erased in presence and in footprint. And we remember Maragha, April 1992, civilians murdered, villages destroyed, families shattered. These were not isolated outbursts. They were not spontaneous riots. They were a part of a systemic and systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing, the revival of a familiar method: dehumanize, terrorize, expel. For Armenians, that method is not new. In 1915, Turkey sought to solve what it called the Armenian question by eliminating Armenians from their ancestral lands through massacre, deportation, starvation, and exile, blatant genocide. In 1988, that same logic resurfaced in Sumgait, Armenians were again targeted not for what they had done, but who they were. Again, mobs incited. Again, authorities stood aside. Again, the goal was clear: make Armenian life impossible. The pogroms of 1988 to 1992 were not an aberration of Soviet collapse. They were the reappearance of genocidal intent, testing whether Armenians could once again be removed with impunity. However, the pogroms, much like the Armenian genocide, did not shatter our people. They ignited them. Our fathers and mothers, aunts and uncles in Artsakh saw what was happening in Sumgait and understood that living under a dictatorial government like Aliyev's regime, fueled by anti-Armenian hatred, meant eventual annihilation. And so, on February 13, 1988, the Artsakh liberation movement was born. A movement grounded in democratic will, calling for union with Armenia, calling for independence to ensure survival. It was driven by the valor of thousands who fought not for conquest, but for mere existence, for the right to live freely on their ancestral land, to worship openly as the first Christian nation, and to pass their identity onto their children. No one spared sacrifice. Everyone believed in the fight for independence, and they won. Many here know this history, but it warrants repeating, because genocide does not always arrive at once. It advances in stages, and it tests the silence of the world. And when our people faced destruction, death, and deportation, they did not cower, they did not bend, and they did not break. They fought. They defended their homeland and their very existence. And yet the pattern did not end. What began in 1915 continued in 1988. What began in 1988 reached its next chapter in 2023. The Aliyev regime behind me completed what pogroms began: the removal of an entire Armenian population from Artsakh. Months of blockade, hunger used as a weapon, medical supplies denied, children rationing bread, the military assault, the forced exodus under threat. When 150,000 Armenians are emptied from their ancestral homeland because their presence is deemed unacceptable, that is not merely a military outcome. It is a chapter of genocide. Genocide is not just mass killing. It is the intentional destruction of people's ability to exist in their homeland through starvation, terror, forced displacement, and cultural erasure. And we have seen this before. The world said never again in 1915. It looked away in 1988, and in 2023 it watched. This is what happens when the international community treats evil lightly, when it mistakes appeasement for justice. And yet the valor and the courage of our brothers and sisters in Artsakh did not cease to exist, despite what Azerbaijan desired. After the war in 2020, David Babayan, foreign minister and advisor to the president of Artsakh, flew to Washington, D.C. and met with every single politician, raising the alarm and providing eyewitness testimony to the war crimes Azerbaijan committed, arguing that impunity would lead to further destruction. On the last days of the genocidal exodus, David Ishkhanyan, president of the Artsakh National Assembly and leader of the AYF, secured transport for every Artsakh Armenian that needed help. He not only made sure human life was saved, but he rescued as much cultural heritage as he could, sending paintings, taras, khachkars along with the caravans. Ruben Vartanyan, who came to Artsakh with a vision of its flourishing future, who from his jail cell and sham trials fearlessly continues to proclaim that Artsakh was, is, and will be again. All these brave men and more today are imprisoned for life in Azerbaijan. They are prisoners of war for their belief and actions to stand courageously against the aggressor. They did not bend, they did not break, and their survival is their resistance movement. As Armenian Americans, we must understand this. Indifference ignorance, and fear are the three allies of injustice. If we do nothing, aggression grows. If we do not learn, we cannot act. And if we are afraid to speak, the persecutor wins without resistance. We are not generations removed from our ancestors who survived genocide. We are their living truth today. I am the great-granddaughter and granddaughter of genocide survivors, the niece of Baku pogrom survivors, the wife of an Artsakh refugee who fought for his homeland in 2016, in 2020, and in 2023, and will do it in a heartbeat again. We are today the front line to the survival of our nation. Armenian Americans have power, and not just sentimental power, but civic power. We vote, we advocate, we educate, we organize, and we build coalitions. We demand the American leadership be measured not by speeches, but by its deeds. So let us speak honestly about what we are witnessing. Not only in Artsakh, not only in Azerbaijan or Turkey, not only in Syria and Jerusalem and Iran, but in the mounting pressure within Armenia itself. When faith is targeted, when the Armenian Apostolic Church is attacked, when journalists and political opposition are silenced, the message is unmistakable. Control the conscience and you control the nation. Turkey and Azerbaijan are not only pressuring Armenia from the outside, they are imposing demands to shape the future within, rewriting priorities, unlawfully dictating the constitution and history of our nation, presenting submission as peace. But peace built on the erasure and the demise of Armenian statehood is not peace. It is surrender disguised as diplomacy. To my fellow Armenian Americans, we must never be complicit. Not through silence, not through exhaustion, not through the temptation to move on because it's too painful. Complicity is what allows the genocidal policies to mature from rhetoric into reality. So today we recommit ourselves to speak for the victims of Sumgait, Kirovabad, Baku, and Maragha, and the displaced Armenians of Artsakh. We recommit to demanding the unconditional release of Armenian POWs and civilian hostages held in Azerbaijan, the safe and dignified right of return for the Armenians of Artsakh, the protection of Armenian cultural and religious heritage, because destroying churches and cemeteries is not collateral damage. It's an attempt to erase evidence that we were ever there, and real accountability, because impunity is the oxygen of genocide. Let our message be unshakable. The Armenian genocide did not end in 1915. It evolved, it resurfaced, and in 2023, it revealed itself again. But so, too, did the Armenian resistance. We are not here to transfer ashes. We are here to transfer fire. May the memory of our martyrs strengthen our courage. May the pain of our people sharpen our clarity, and may our unity turn remembrance into action until justice is secured and the Armenian survival is never again treated as negotiable, and until the future of the Armenian nation is secured. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngerui Teresa. We truly are at the front lines of the survival of the Armenian nation, and we will not stop. We cannot stop until the future of the Armenian nation is secured. As we remember the victims of Sumgait and Baku, of Kirovabad and Maragha, and of all who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation's survival, we now turn to prayer. I invite Surp Khach, Armenian Apostolic Church pastor, Der Sarkis Aktavukyan, to lead us in honoring the souls of those we lost.
Der vormia, Christos vortias tu zoan hagalie parekur, kthak varachagan sirov diokis nunchetzerotskots. Ishader yev manavand sokin, որ կանգան ի Բաքու, ի Sumgait, ի Maragha, ի Artsakh եւ ի Artsakh աշխարհ։ Հավուր մեջիկալստյան արքայության, առարժանի ողորմության, քավության եւ թողության մեղած, տասավորյալ բայձարացոն Սուրբ Սկողաչագոմյան թասուն, զիտու եստեր եւ արարիչ ամենեցուն, թադավոր գենթանյաց եւ մերերոց, եւ քեզ վայելե փառք իշխանություն եւ բադիվ, այժմ եւ միշտ եւ հավիտյանս հավիտենից ամեն, օրհնյալ Տեր մեր Հիսուս Քրիստոս, ամեն։ Հայր մեր, որ եկիր սեր, սուրբ եւ Հիսի անուն քո, եկես արկայություն քո, եւ Հիսին անգո, Սած մեր անաբազոր դուր մեզ այսօր, Քո մեզ զարդիս մեր, որպես և մեկ թողում մերոց, և մի դանիրս մեզի բոցություն, այլ պարգյայի զիքոյ արքայություն և զորություն և փառք հավիտյան Սեր Թորորին բարձկը գադար
On behalf of the AYF DC chapter, I would like to say thank you, Derhair. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. 38 years after Sumgait, the facts are clear. Armenians are systematically targeted. Our homeland is under threat. Commemoration without action achieves nothing. Demand the freedom of our Armenian prisoners illegally held and tortured by Azerbaijan. Demand the collective, safe, and dignified return of our Artsakh brothers and sisters to our ancestral Armenian home. Demand an end to the destruction of Armenian churches, cemeteries, and monuments in occupied Artsakh. Demand Azerbaijan withdraw from sovereign Armenian land. Demand US sanctions on Aliyev and all Azerbaijani war criminals and stop rewarding the genocide with US tax dollars. Call, email, show up, follow up. If we want security and dignity for our people, it requires sacrifice and sustained strategic pressure. That responsibility is ours. Gehishenk, Gabahanchenk, Miasnapar Bidi Hachtaharenk.